rules. No one likes rules when they inhibit our passions and our desires, do we? As a child, you dream of a world where there are no rules. You think your parents were put on this world to just keep you from doing all the fun things, don't you? It can feel like that at times. Like, well, why can't I jump off the roof of the house onto the trampoline, Dad? That is a great idea. We did it, and we got in trouble. But why could we not do that? Because you're going to break something, and you're not the one that pays for the medical bills. We are, and we're safe on top of that. But more importantly, probably the medical bills. But you have all these rules in your life that you think, like, man, as you're growing up, you think they inhibit your fun or your ability to live. But the older you get, the more mature you get, the more that you realize that rules are actually there to protect you, right? Could you imagine a world of anarchy with no rules anywhere around you? As a child, it sounds great, but as an adult, you realize even with rules and with laws, you realize, wow, that is not what we want. You imagine where there were no speed limit rules. I mean, some of you are like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Or if there was no rule against drinking and driving. You know, you see that there are rules and laws all around us, but they protect us. But we also know with government, and God bless our government, I'm thankful for government and oversight. We need that in our lives and in our communities. But with that, in government, we can see some crazy and even silly things. And so I wanted to read just a few Texas laws, specific Texas laws that you may not know about. I found this on ABC 13's website, okay? So if it's wrong, blame them and send them an email. Few Texas laws. You cannot shoot a buffalo from a second-story hotel. I just want to meet the person that this law was created for and shake their hand. Another one is it is illegal to dust any public building with a feather duster. I don't know why. Wish my mom would have known this when I was a child. You cannot milk a stranger's cow. And the last one is that wire cutters cannot be carried in your pocket. You don't want to cut somebody's barbed wire and then go milk their cow for them. Like, just not going to happen. Unless you have cows and you're like, please come milk my cow because I don't have to do it. Now, those are silly laws, but today we're going to talk about the Ten Commandments, some of the laws that God gave to the Israelites many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, as the people of God were just starting. And if you're new with us, we are in a year-long series called God's Big Story. And we're looking at the overall picture of the Bible, the story of the Bible, to see that these are not just disjointed stories, that this is from Genesis to Revelation, this is a story of God's rescuing of his people. And that all these stories are connected, that they're not disconnected, but that we can pick and choose from and make ourselves the hero of the story. But this is God's story. The story is the Bible. We say that the Bible is for us, but it is not about us. It is, yes, it's encouraging. Yes, you can see yourself even in some of the stories, but the Bible is for us, not about us. And that's hard to hear sometimes in our individualized culture in the West, right? It's because we can sometimes, if we're not careful, we can make everything about ourselves, the self, the person, and that's something that we try to weed out of our children, isn't it? This world is like, I could add $1 every time my dad told me that this world is not just about you, Derek. It is, because it's my world. And so we're talking about this big story. And so last week we talked about Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt from Pharaoh, this Pharaoh that had enslaved them. They lived in Egypt for 430 years. And they finally fled after God put these plagues on the Egyptians, and Pharaoh finally said, go. We see them, they cross the Red Sea, they go into the wilderness, and we're going to pick up about 2 months after the crossing of the Red Sea is where we're going to be. But in this 2-month period, the people of God are homeless. They're sojourning. They are in a foreign land. If you could imagine fleeing your place of home and the place that you knew of everything for 430 years, although it wasn't the most satisfying place for the Israelites, I'm sure, with being enslaved by the Egyptians, there's also this sense that they're now traveling and floating around this large group of people with no place to call home. There's some amazing things that happen that take place before they get to Mount Sinai. God provides manna from heaven, bread for the Israelites. He provides quail for them to eat. He provides water from a rock in the middle of the desert. And they arrive at Mount Sinai. And really when you look at it, there's actually some scholarly debate on where the actual site of Mount Sinai is. What is traditionally considered Mount Sinai, they've actually not found anything archaeologically that would prove that this is actually Mount Sinai. And there's really two places that they would say this is Mount Sinai. And so it's pretty interesting when you think about them not having the exact location. But God tells Moses, go onto the mountain, and God speaks words that we call the 10 Commandments. And so before we get to the actual 10 Commandments, I want to set the scene for us. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. The Israelites are 2 months out from fleeing Egypt and slavery. They've been in the wilderness with Moses leading them. They've already had one war with Amalek. They've seen God do some incredible things, like splitting the sea wide open and manna and quail and all those things. Moses has now set up, by his father-in-law's recommendation, he has set up judges. His father-in-law looked at him and said, hey, you're trying to do too much on your own. You need to set judges so they can judge some of the small things. And so there's starting to be this, you're starting to see the people of God, the nation of Israel, start to take shape. And so some of this might seem minor, but as we go further down, you can start seeing and connecting some of these dots. And so Exodus chapter 19, and we're going to start in verse 10, and we're going to read a few different passages. Verse 10, verse 12 says, the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them, and today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in sight of all the people, and you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up to the mountain or to touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the edge of the mountain shall be put to death. Skip down to verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in the thunder. We like to think of the 10 Commandments as this pretty little picture, this painting. But before we get to the 10 Commandments, we see this scene that I want to show you this morning, is that we have this powerful scene at the bottom of Mount Sinai, the glory of God, the holiness of God being revealed to the people of God. They had obviously seen the sea split, and God's leading them by pillar and cloud, and they're seeing God do incredible things. We're seeing him provide with manna and with quail and all the things that we've already talked about. But now God is showing his power and his majesty to the people of God. I don't know if you've ever been in a bad storm, or a storm strong enough that you were scared, nervous. Hurricane season is quickly approaching, right? And every hurricane season, we get prepared, and we're thinking about what to do if a hurricane happens, and how are we gonna tighten down the house and get everything put together. A few years ago, I was in El Salvador with a few teenagers on a missions trip, and I was sitting on my bed in a hotel room, and I'd never experienced this before. So if you come from like a different part of the country, like that's nothing. But I'm sitting in a third world country in this, when I say hotel, we're not staying in a Ritz. It's a hotel, but it's like outdoor camping hotel. It's different. And so I'm sitting on my bed in charge of about 20 different students, and I feel my bed start to shake. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, that's funny. I must have like I'm like 20 years old. Like I might have vertigo. I don't know. And so I'm like sitting like, and then it starts to shake more. And then all of a sudden it hit me like, we're in the middle of an earthquake. And then all of a sudden it starts to shake, and everything's rattling on the walls. And I can sometimes be a calm person, but I wasn't when I was in charge of 20 students in a third world country with the earthquake. I'm like running through the hotel, everybody outside, and all the native people are like, it's just an earthquake. It's fine. I'm like, no, it's not. You can't put a Florida boy in the middle of an earthquake and expect him to just like sit around and just kick back and relax. I imagine Something similar to that as the Israelites are camping at the bottom of the mountain, hearing this roar, watching fire and thunder and loud sounds one after another, and the mountain shaking, parents holding their children in protection, comforting them, but this was no ordinary storm. This was the presence and the glory of God for probably the first time being revealed in such a majestic way to the people. It's this holiness. It's awesome, but yet terrifying. So terrifying that he says, even in chapter 19, what he says, if you even touch the mountain, what's going to happen to you? You're going to die. There's this terror. There's this fear. And even in the setting up of the commandments before the law is given, we see his holiness on display. Touch the mountain, you will die. We get this glimpse of what it means to have fear of God. And in a sense, I think that we've lost this in our modern culture. Now, if you grew up in church, you might remember this, but back in like old days, like my old days, you would not dare run inside of the church sanctuary. Why? Because it was God's house, and there was going to be some little old lady that would snatch you up, even if it wasn't your mom, right? They could not even be related. They're going to snatch you up, and in the churches I grew up in, they could even spank you. It's like there was this fear and this reverence, like you don't. And I grew up Pentecostal. Unless you're in the Spirit, you don't run in church, right? And so there was this like kind of mentality, like there's this reverence of the sanctuary, this fear of God. Now I'm not saying that we need to like kick all the kids out of church and like no running and like I love watching it, but I'm saying there has been a sense that we've lost this fear and reverence of God. Yes, God is gracious. Yes, God is loving, but he's also just, and he's also holy, and yes, it is terrifying in a sense. Here's the main idea this morning if you're taking notes. The 10 Commandments reveal God's holy character and our sinful nature. The 10 Commandments reveal God's holy character and our sinful nature. And here's an interesting fact for you. Did you know that the word 10 Commandments is not in the Bible? It might be in your header of your Bible. If you look at Exodus chapter 20, where we're going to be, but in the Hebrew Bible, the word 10 Commandments is not there. It's actually the word Decalogue, which dec meaning 10 and logos meaning the word. So this actually translates as 10 words. This is 10 words from God, 10 laws from God. And then you can get a little bit further if you want to really mess up your study time. There's actually 3 different versions of the 10 Commandments, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish. So you can go look those up and decide which one is right. But the 10 Commandments are really universal, aren't they? When we look at our culture and our world, we would even look at that and say, even though that there's some what might seem strict laws to some people, for the most part, yeah, like you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't cheat, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't murder somebody. Like most people, even if they're not a Christian or a righteous person, they would say, yeah, you shouldn't do those things. And so here's something that I want to do this morning. If you could, this is the only time you're allowed to do this. If you could take your phone out just for a moment, and we're going to take a pop quiz on the 10 Commandments. I'm serious. You can get your phone out. I got this idea from Pastor J.D. Greer, pastor in on the East Coast. I believe it's in Carolina, and we're going to take a test, a pop quiz on the 10 Commandments. No, I'm not going to ask you to recite them from memory, which some of you may be able to, but I want you to get your phone out and open the Notes app or whatever an Android has. I don't know what that has because who has an Android? Okay, all right. They're the ones that make you have a green text bubble. That's it. That's the only thing you need to know. It's discipleship, okay? We're trying to disciple our people to Apple. Okay, and so here's what I want you to do. For every commandment that you have never broken, I want you to write the number 1 down. Okay, just one number for every commandment that you haven't broken. We're going to go through in Exodus chapter 20, and we're going to look at some of these commands. And so we're going to start in verse 3, Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. The first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. Now this is not just gods. This is not putting anything in front of God. Can we honestly look at our lives and say there's been nothing more important in my life than God in every season of my life? We sometimes will even get more excited about a new Netflix show season coming out more than we will about the Word of God, don't we? Not like that. I don't mean that to Jesus juke you. But I do mean it in a sense as a reality check of us when it says there shall be no other gods. The reality is that we have to have a check in our hearts and say, have I put anything in front of God before? It could be your health. It could be finances. It could be a lot of things. We could go through a litany of things and say, yes, we have put these things before God. So if you can, put the number 1 there if you can. But don't, there's another one about lying coming up. Number 2. This is going to be a good exercise. Number 2, Exodus chapter 20, verse 4, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. Now, you may remember this, or in your translation, you might say no idols. You shall know of no idols in your life or graven image. Now, Israel, in the world that they were born into, the ancient Near East, Israel was pretty much the only nation that idol worship did not exist. So as you think about this for a moment, we talked about the Egyptian gods previously, right? They're some of the gods that are depicted as flies, or they have horses' heads, and like all the goddesses and images that would be crafted and built and written into rocks. But Israel was one of the only nations, if not the only nation, that the idol worship did not take place. Egypt, Babylon, the Canaanites, as they were going in, if you remember Baal and Asheroth, image worship. When I was in Cuba a couple years ago, we would go into people's homes, witnessing door to door, and we would knock on their door, and they would open the door, Christian or not, they would invite you in, and you would have a cup of coffee. So by the end of the day, you had about 15 cups of coffee shaken by the time you got back to the hotel. You would go in and talk to these people and share, and you'd see these it looked like little shrines everywhere, just little images. And they practice a religion there called Santeria. That there's actually no written form of Santeria. It's only passed down verbally. It's an oral religion. If you can imagine how distorted that religion could be after generations and generations of witchcraft and different things that go into Santeria. And they have these little idols all over the house, just everywhere. Now, we don't do that in our culture, do we? We don't normally have an idol unless you're a part of another religion, but we get really, really good at hiding our idols, don't we? Can you say that you have no idols in your life? Let's look at number 3, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Over time, we have boiled this just down to saying the name of God unjustly, or taking it in vain. Like we say that quickly, and sometimes it could slip out of your mouth like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. We've boiled it down to that. And yes, there is a sense of that, and that is part of it. We even had this conversation with our children because we don't want them to even get close. And so our kids were asking, like, why can't we say, oh my gosh? Like, well, it's too close to taking the Lord's name in vain. And so we give them a different word to say because we don't want them to get so close that it becomes something that they get used to. We want there to be reverence around that name. And so in that, but there's more to it. This is also not living as a Christ follower should live. You take the Lord's name in vain when you live counter to what the scriptures say. We've become desensitized in our culture with the acceptance of it in movies and shows and the GD words and all the things that we hear, and it's like you don't even hear it anymore. But are we living up to the name? Are we taking the Lord's name? And can you say that? If you have, and you can, never put a 1. Number 4, Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, this is a good one. This is a great one, a good example because God gave us this example when he created the world. On the 7th day, he rested and he took time to rest. Not that he needed recovery, but I believe that he was showing us an example of what we are to do. We're to work hard. We're going to put effort into things, but you're also to rest. This is hard in our hustle culture that we have now. That if you're not working yourself to the bone, then you're not going to be successful. That if you're not putting in 80 hours a week, then you shouldn't expect to do anything with your life. That kind of pressure that has been put on our workplace and our workforce. And I'm not saying be lazy. Trust me and hear me and understand. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, among the hard work, are you taking a day each week to rest and say, this is my time with my family, this is my time with the Lord? Because what I have learned over the time is that Sabbath is not just sitting on a couch watching a show for 12 hours and binge watching something. Although it can be tempting, right? And you feel guilted because Netflix is like, you still watching? Why, yes, I am. Thank you. But it's not just sitting on a couch watching a show. It's resting in the Lord. That Jesus has become our Sabbath. And so here's the question for you. Can you honestly say that you take a Sabbath weekly? Are you resting? Are you coming down off the high? And that's hard to do because as with me, I'm preaching to myself here. We have these things as well. We're always accessible. There's always something that is news and information and work and emails and texts and all the things that happen. Are we taking time to rest and to have Sabbath? Number 5, 20 verse 12. Honor your father and your mother. Now, we know and understand that being under authority is a reality of life. We have bosses, we have officers, we have government officials. But here's the thing that I love about the scriptures is that God put the parents as the first authority that we ever experience in our lives. And it is one of the only commands that has a tag to it. If you honor your father and mother, then you will live a long and prosperous life. It is a conditional promise. It is a conditional command. And so we see this, honor our father and our mother. But what is our inclination from the time that we can think and we can talk for ourselves? It's disobedience. That is our natural heart's bent, is to disobey, to push the limits. And it feels like every family has like one child that just like they try to find out where the limit is. You know that? Like some of you are like, yes, I'm not shaking my head because they're here. Can you say that you have obeyed your parents fully? Not sneaking out when you were a teenager? Not talking under your breath when you disagreed with your parents and their discipline issues or their discipline decisions? Number 6, Exodus 20:13. You shall not murder. Now everyone takes a big breath and is like, oh, I got a number. How's your test going so far? I've done it. I've marked it. I've thought about it a few times with a few coworkers, but I haven't done it. Thou shalt not murder. You shall not murder. But did you know that Jesus said that to hate someone in your heart is just like murder? Okay, let's see if your eraser is working now on your test, and if your delete button works on your phone. Number 7, 20 verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. Okay. I got this one too. I've been faithful to my spouse, no infidelity. We're good, right? This is number 2. Well, actually number 1 because you had to delete the last one. But Jesus again says if you look at a woman lustfully or a man lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Pornography, sex scenes and movie shows. If you've lusted, don't mark them 1. Number 8, you shall not steal. Now, this is a really good one because no one likes a thief, right? I mean, nothing gets shared on Facebook more than a picture of a thief, like, getting caught by a camera, right? They're like, it could be in, like, Michigan, and like, somebody catch this guy, and you're like, who's gonna see that from Texas? And like, yep, I know him from Michigan. You shall not steal. But can you ever say that you've never taken something that belonged to someone else? You've never stolen answers from a test in school? That I've never taken credit that I didn't deserve? And for the millennials in the room, I have 2 words for you. Napster and LimeWire. Some of the younger people are like, what, is that Spotify? Is that? We were horrible. I mean, my parents' computer had so many viruses on it from the music that we were downloading. I don't know how many computers my parents had to replace because of just music stealing off the internet. And my youth pastor tried to tell me, you're stealing. And I was like, no, it's just for my car. Like that makes a difference. Mark that one off the list. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You could be worded, or maybe worded in your translation, you shall not lie. This is exaggeration. This is hidden sins, not outright bold-faced lying. I remember one time I got caught in a lie by my dad, and that I lied to somebody else. And I said, Dad, I didn't lie to them. I just didn't tell them the whole truth. And like that's my selfish way of trying to justify my lying, right? Have you ever lied? Some of you may have already done it on the 1 through 9. And you need to go back and mark that off. Number 10, verse 17, you shall not covet. Can we stop at number 9? Because this one hits a little bit close to home for a lot of us. Is that contentment seems to be something that we don't do well with in our culture. I'm broad stroking a little bit here. But don't we always need that new thing? Since our phones are now listening to you and an ad pops up on your phone, you think about it and it pops up on your social media feed, doesn't it? It's a sign from God. God's telling me I need to go get that new side-by-side. Honey, look. I need that new vehicle. I need that new house. And even think about it, a few years ago, nobody in our world cared about shiplap. Not one person. You would tear it out of your house if you tore down the wall. Like, what is this stuff? Rip it out. But what are we doing now? Chip and Joe. It's awesome. Have to have it, right? We're big Chip and Joe fans. I don't feel like we're good. Can you say that you've never wanted someone else's vehicle or wanted someone else's popularity or their finances or their life? So here's a rhetorical question for us this morning. A good pop quiz is, how did you do on the test? How many numbers did you get? The point is that you probably didn't score very well, did you? If we're honest, we probably all scored 0 in the room. Do you think that God didn't know that you wouldn't be able to keep the law? That you wouldn't, among your own strength and your own will, that you wouldn't be able to obey all of the 10 commandments all the time? Of course he is. Of course he did, because he's omnipotent. He knows all. He's all-powerful. He's all-knowing. He knew that you wouldn't be able to keep the law. He knew that the Israelites would not be able to keep the law. So why would God set up this law, this commands? Yes, God desires for us to live holy lives. He wants us to be set apart, a light in darkness. But I believe that he also wants us to know that we are helpless without him. This is why Jesus went after the Pharisees so hard in the New Testament, because they were following the laws to the best of their ability. But Jesus went after the heart of the law. You say that you're not committing adultery, but you've been looking at other women that are not your spouse. You say that you've not murdered, but you have hatred in your heart for your brother. It's just like murder. And so here's 2 things that I want us to get out. 3 things, actually, 3 points quickly. Is that the first is this: God's character shines bright through the 10 commandments. This is the beauty of it. Is that God is perfect, that this is his natural character. That I heard it said that the law is a mere reflection of God's character. Now, look at James. You don't have to turn there, but James says to use the law as a mirror for us to look at and to reflect off. You know that the difference between God's reflection of the law and our reflection of the law is very, very big. It's a very big gap. We know that. We can look at the 10 commandments and see that very quickly, that we are very far off. We fall short in every area. But character is something that it takes time to find out, doesn't it? It takes time to find out someone's character. The more that we know someone, the more we see their faults. We see this in marriage. You see this, right? The longer that you know somebody, the more you see their character flaws. You see their personality traits. You see flaws about them. That's just the reality. The longer that you know somebody, the more that you're going to see their flaws. The beauty of the intimacy of marriage, though, is what? Is that you see their flaws, yet you're still madly in love with them. There's this intimate connection that in the middle of those flaws, you're like, no one else could love me as deeply as my spouse could. You see those things. But with God, we could look in eternity and there will still be no flaws, just perfection. Pastor Colin Smith said this about the character of God in the 10 Commandments. He says, every one of the 10 Commandments reflects some aspect of the character of God. Why should you not commit adultery? Because God is faithful. Why should you not lie? Because God is truth. And so we have to be careful to not boil down the 10 Commandments to just a holy to-do list. What I don't want you to get out of this today is you leave here today and say, I've just got to do more and I've got to obey the commandments even more and stronger to my own ability and my own strength. That's not what this is about. The 10 Commandments are a picture of who God is. It's his holiness on display. Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 3, the prophet says this, you who are of pure eyes than to see the evil and cannot look at wrong. He's talking about God, that God is so holy and so pure that he can't even look at sin. He can't even look at evil. The problem is that the law revealed and still does is that a holy God cannot be with sinful man. But what do we do with sin in our life, in our culture from time to time? I'm broad stroking. What do we do with sin is we downplay it in our lives. And we say things like, well, nobody's perfect. Well, no one is without mistakes, right? And so we say these phrases in a sense of justifying things that we know that we shouldn't be doing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Your kids do this at home? Well, nobody's perfect. I'm not, you expect me to be a perfect child. It's not about justifying our sin. We downplay it. We can forget in our downplaying how serious God takes sin. Pastor Ray Ortland says that what kind of person would say to us, you shall not steal? A generous person who can be fully trusted, who would never rob us or who would never lie to us. That person is Jesus. And on the flip side, what kind of people need to be told, you shall not steal? People who are unfair to one another without even realizing it. People who have shown to be unfaithful since the beginning of time. Which leads me to my second point, is that human sinfulness is on full display in the commandments. Human sinfulness is on full display with the 10 Commandments. As we read these commandments, we understand quickly that we are a long ways off from where we need to be and where God has called us to be. But here's the truth for us, is that we have to be alerted to this fact. If not, we can quickly find ourselves like the Pharisees in the New Testament who do their best to strive and keep the law and keep the commandments and look perfect and put together on the outside. But when we are alerted to the fact that we cannot keep these commandments all on our own perfectly all the time, it shows us that we have to have full dependence on the Lord. That we can't do it without, that despite our best efforts, that we are still incredibly sinful. That our hearts are inclined to evil, to be dependent upon his grace and his mercy. In the Old Testament, we have over 600 laws between Exodus and Leviticus. And if you read through Leviticus and you've been on a Bible reading plan, you work your way through that and you're like, why do they have laws for everybody? Do you have to have long sideburns? Is that a requirement? Why do we have to do all these things? And you can't cook a goat and a baby goat in its mother's milk, and you're like, wow, there's a lot of things going on here. No one can obey 600 laws, can they? Not all the time, not in their humanness. We understand that, we know that. But just because we can't keep up with all the laws does not mean that we don't try to obey God's word. I want you to hear me on this. We have to still strive to obey God and his word because they are still commands from the Lord. The difference is our motivation. Kevin DeYoung says this, salvation isn't the reward for our obedience. Salvation is the reason for our obedience. Do you see the difference? Is that we don't obey so that we will strive to earn God's favor or to earn God's love or try to somehow earn God's salvation. And we see this many times in churches. People will tell you, and your friends I'm sure have told you before, I just kind of want to get my life cleaned up a little bit before I come to church. I'm not quite ready. And the truth and the reality is if they could understand that none of us were ready. None of us are still ready if it was dependent upon our actions and our lives. So we don't obey so he'll love us more or try to earn salvation. That's a losing game. But we do it because we've been saved and we've been rescued. And if the 10 Commandments reveal the character of God, then shouldn't our desire to be to pursue the character of God as well? Listen to what Thomas Watson said. He says, "Till sin be bitter, Christ will not be sweet." Till sin be bitter, Christ will not be sweet. What does he mean by that? Is that until we see the depths of our sin, until we see the fruit and the reward for our sin, that sin brings death and destruction in our lives, until we understand what we've been rescued from and pulled up, as it says, out of the miry clay, until we understand that and see that, we won't understand fully how sweet it is to be loved by Jesus. We won't see just how beautiful the gospel is until we understand what we've been rescued from. And as Paul says, is that we were dead in our trespasses. Dead in our trespasses, that in and among ourselves, that sin has brought death to us, and that without the gospel of Jesus, without his sacrifice, then we are forever destined to hell. Without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins, where we would die in the presence of a holy God. The third thing is this, is that God gives what he commands. God gives what he commands. He gives us the way. Yes, God calls us be holy, for he is holy, but he provided the way for us to be holy. In all of our shortcomings, in all of our difficulties, in all of the challenges, and all the things that we look in our life and we say, look how I've failed, and all of that. Somehow, yet, we can still stand and say we are holy, not because of ourselves, but because of what God has done in us. He doesn't give us the law and leave us to our own devices. He provides the way. He provided the way for the Israelites with the sacrificial system, which we're going to talk about, but luckily for us, we had somebody make the sacrifice for us once and for all in Jesus. And in that, we can stand before a holy God blameless, not for what we have done, but for what he has done. The 10 Commandments reveal God's holy character and our sinful nature. Would you bow your heads with me this morning?